Hey guys, I had someone ask if I could share some study tips regarding to classes you take during nursing school. The tips I'm going to give you is just based on what I have seen or have done in my fast-paced LPN program, so it could be different at your school, or learning for you may be different than how I learn and study things. So first things first, you're going to want to go to tutoring if they offer tutoring. Dosage calc is what I went to tutoring for because I had issues with rounding milliliters per hour problems. I'm really good at drops per minute and finding how many tablets you give, but when it came to doing total volume over total time, I would get the 0 point whatever number and I didn't know how to round it. So I went to tutoring for that and I passed my dosage calc competency exam with a 90. So tutoring definitely pays off. And that's for any subject. If your teacher offers, an hour before or after class or 30 minutes before or after class for questioning or tutoring on that certain subject, I would definitely recommend going to those sessions. Always ask questions, even if you feel it may not be the smartest sounding question. If you don't understand something, that's the whole purpose of your teacher being there. They're there to teach you and make sure that you understand the material that they're going over. Always ask questions. Even if you're a little bit embarrassed of your question, stay after or on your break, ask the teacher. Do not be afraid to ask. Form study groups. I know a couple of people in my class are closer to certain students than others, so on weekends before we have a test on a Monday, they'll have people come over to their house for a study party and they'll go over information that may be on the test. So if you bond really well with others in your class, form a study group and each weekend rotate houses or go to Starbucks and study or something. I don't do the study groups because typically I work on weekends all weekend, so I don't really have time to go to study group. During the week is when I study. How I study for like a test, at my school, generally our instructors go over certain material and they emphasize like, hey, this will be on the test, make sure you know everything about this subject. Like, for example, we're taking our psych test on Monday on chapters 1 through 12. That's a lot of chapters. So our instructor went over certain key points that we learned throughout those 12 chapters and what we should know. The number one key thing she told us that would be a question on the test is what state mandated psychiatric training for nurses, and of course that's Massachusetts. So she kind of gave us that answer, but it's good to know that that's how her testing will be. Everything that we have talked about in lecture, she said will be on the test. So I just briefly skimmed through the chapter. Anything I'm not really firm or current on, if I feel like I don't really know that subject too well, I will reread that section in the book over and over again until it's concrete in my head. That's really how I study. I just read and reread constantly until I can ask myself in my head, like, hey, what does this mean? And then I'll answer myself in my head, and then I'll go back and look it up. You could also do the little Quizlet questions at the back, like at the end of each chapter, they have like 10 questions that will ask you certain questions throughout that chapter. Usually the answers are in the back of the book, so you can always quiz yourself that way to see if you are retaining the information from those chapters. For me, it has to be quiet for me to study. I don't like to be distracted. I hide my phone, I cut my computer off, I cut the TV off, the radio off, anything, and I just sit in my room with everything open and I just start reading. Sometimes I read chapters out loud to myself so I can hear it, but normally I'm like a kinesthetic learner, so I like to hear it, see it, and then try it. But that's really how I study. The only other study, what's the word I'm looking for? Advice, I guess I could give is Like pharmacology, the number one thing you need to remember is making drug cards. Even if it's a drug that you briefly talk about, make a drug card on it and make sure you have the adverse reactions, what it's for, the patient teaching, and what a safe dose is. And you kind of want to brush up on like toxicity for those drugs because you don't want your patient to be going into, toxicity with that drug, and you want to know the signs and symptoms if they are having it. And you also want to know their signs and symptoms if they're possibly having an adverse reaction to the medication due to other meds they're taking, or if they're just allergic to the medicine in general. But other than that, those are kind of my study tips. I hope I was helpful. I'm always here if you have questions. I'll try and answer them. If I don't know them, I'll straight out tell you, like, I don't know the answer to that. But tutoring. Always go to tutoring. Form a study group. Usually you'll have like a wingman in class where they're like your best friend, your go-to. Ask them first. If they don't know, ask another classmate that might be good in that subject. And then, of course, resort to your teacher, instructor, whatever they're called at your school. They're instructors at my school. Also, for skills, what I found very helpful, my school holds like open labs on weekends especially, so you can go in the sim lab and use the dummies and, perform nursing skills on them, and that's perfectly awesome. I loved going up there and practicing on those, any kind of skill, and I know back in 101 and 102 we used to use them for like our CNA skills, like bed bathing, transferring, rolling, using the bed sheet, the draw sheet to move them up in bed and stuff like that. So yeah, that's pretty much all I have. I'm sorry if it wasn't helpful, but I do hope it helped a little bit. And my new vlog for my nursing term 190 will be out the first week of January.